The All Things TechIE podcast is a product of the Extreme Media Network. For advertising and sponsorship opportunities, please visit www.extrememedia.ie. That's XTREME media.ie.
Hello from Dublin, Ireland.
Audio-visual from an Irish perspective. This is the All Things TechIE podcast.
It is indeed. All Things TechIE podcast, episode 49. I'm Justin Dawson. Can't believe we've made it to episode 49, listeners. And what a great episode I have for you. I was able to tie down David Labuskes, the CEO of AVIXA, and ask him how he got involved in the AV industry. It's the All Things TechIE podcast, episode 49.
Like our show, don't forget to subscribe to All Things TechIE in your favorite podcast store.
I just have to start off by asking you, like, for a guy that is the sort of the king of AVIXA now, is sitting at the top. Where did it all begin? Where did your AV career begin? I love asking this question and people go, oh geez, throw me in the deep end.
Well, I was born in Pittsburgh in the 60s, and it's interesting, actually. I was just chatting with my wife about this earlier today because our son just finished his school and he's going through the interview process, and we were talking about the differences in hers and my career. Hers was pretty prescribed. She got a degree in accounting and business administration. She got a job as an accountant. Then she got promoted to a controller. My pathway into AVIXA is far more circuitous than that type of a pathway. My degree is actually in international politics.
It's not the weirdest one I've heard, because Mark Coxon told me that he studied veterinary, and how you end up from being a vet to doing AV, I think it has to be the most bizarre one.
Yeah, that is although I guess you could probably argue that both degrees have some value in our lives, both Mark's and mine at this point. Ultimately, I ended up in IT. Let me skip through about 72 different part-time jobs. I ended up in IT, and I sort of refer to it as a IT mercenary. I had my own firm. I was doing project management, consulting. This was long enough ago that I was doing coding, systems development. I was doing systems implementation. And one of the gigs that I got in that world was working for an IT department as an owner's rep in construction. And so I was interfacing for the IT department, working with all of the trades, walking through why we needed X, why we needed Y, why this wouldn't work, why this would work, and I fell in love with it. I loved the physical reality of IT being built into a building. So going from a green field through site construction and implementation of the infrastructure to actually being there on opening day and seeing the people come in to work, and knowing that I had been a part of that from while it was a dream on a piece of paper, and ultimately was able to move that position into starting up a consulting practice for one of the world's largest architectural engineering firms. RTKL has now been acquired by Arcadis and is part of Callison RTKL. But I was hired in by their engineering department to do structured cabling design. And ultimately sort of rode the everything over IP wave and moved from structured cabling to audiovisual, added acoustics, added wireless, added medical communications, electronic security, essentially anything that needed to be designed that moved information from point A to point B in a building. We had an AV practice that I interfaced with, at the time, an organization called InfoComm. I was very active with an organization called BIXI, which was the structured cabling world. And Randy Lemke, my predecessor, announced his retirement, and somebody actually on my team said you should take a look at that position. It might be kind of interesting to you. I had a really good position at that point, so really wasn't necessarily looking for it. But started talking to some of the industry, started talking through what would be involved with it, and threw my name in the ring. And over the course of 6 or 8 months and about 237 interviews, ultimately I ended up being selected for a position.
Now,
And
is that true? How many interviews would you have to
nah, it
have
wasn't
for this?
237, but this
I,
it was a long process. There is a search committee involved that was appointed by the board. There's a recruiter involved. So when you're going through a search like that, and especially an organization like AVIXA, I mean, it's has an extraordinary reputation, and so there were several hundred applicants, and I managed to fool the search committee into thinking I would be the best. It
Mhm.
was it was actually, I think, an extraordinary process. Um, I'll tell you at the end again. I'm alluding to my wife again, but as I was leaving for the final interview, and at that point, by that point, I was really committed. Like I had done a lot of research, I had done a lot, and it was there was I really wanted this job. Plus, I'm a pretty competitive guy, and so I really wanted to win too. But more wanted the job, and so as I was leaving at dark 30 in the morning to make sure I got to the interview on time and give my wife a kiss goodbye, and she said, "Have fun." And I'm like, "Have fun?" Like I'm leaving and I'm getting in the car and I'm driving away, and I'm like, "Have fun? Like this might be the most important meeting of my career. Have fun?" But I mean, it was a couple hour drive to the interview. By the time I got there, it was like, yeah, that's actually the perfect advice. Like if I'd gone into that interview trying to be anybody other than me, then I would be either setting myself up for failure that day or setting myself up for failure in the position, because they'd be hiring somebody that wasn't me.
Yeah.
And at that point, they were down to 3 or 4 finalists. Any one of us could have done the job. It was really more about who did they want in the position. And really, I did just have fun, and I had a blast. We had a great conversation. When I left, the recruiter walked me out the door. She said, "How do you feel like you did?" And I'm like, "They know who I am. There's no doubt. They know who I am." And so now it's up to them.
It's funny, David, because I've had interviews like that for positions, and you come out of that interview process and you go, "Was that actually an interview?" Because you're like, they asked me more about like what's the craziest thing you've done. It's like, well, I'm hoping to jump out of a plane at some stage in the next year. I remember when I interviewed for one of my earlier private sector roles, and that was one of the questions. What's the what have you got planned on the horizon in the next month? It's like, well, on New Year's Eve day, I'm gonna jump out of a plane, and it sort of took the moment off the interview that I said to myself afterwards, maybe I shouldn't have mentioned that. I got the job anyways, you know. But so, you know, having that role, and at the time it was InfoComm, was that one of your philosophies and goals to change the name and the brand of InfoComm, or was that even on the agenda at the time?
No, in fact, it was explicitly not on the agenda. I, I think there's if you sort of follow companies in general, right? There's this sort of cliche new CEO is going to come in and put his or her fingerprint on the organization. They're going to restructure it. They're going to reorganize. They're going to rebrand. They're going to fill in the blank. in AVIXA was not, or InfoComm was not broken. I wasn't coming into an organization that needed a turnaround. I wasn't trying to do a rescue. I was taking over for a very strong, very competent leader, very different individual than I am. But it wasn't come in, the ship is sinking, let's restructure everything. It was come in, listen, and learn. I mean, um, we're an organization that represents a $250 billion global industry with very few things that are held in common around the world. And it's really complicated. I mean, we've got joint ventures that own shows in Europe and Asia. At the time, we had joint venture that owned and operated shows in Latin America. We had a software development subsidiary. We've got the overall membership, but even within the membership, you have manufacturers, you have exhibitors, you have integrators, distributors. um, I'm just not the type of person that has the hubris to come in and say this all needs to be blown up and I have a perfect vision. I don't. What I am really, I think one of the things I think, so interview question number 73-A, what are your strengths? One of my strengths is listening and and and
And it's a super
hearing.
strength to
uh,
have. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and so that's what I did. I know that that's another cliche, right? We're going to do a listening tour for a year, but really, I mean, from the day that they announced that I was going to be the new CEO, uh, true to AV, I was standing. There was a program called InfoComm 100 back at the time where we would bring in about 100 or so of the most active members, and there'd be 2 days of programming and shockingly social activities that included a bar. And
Never. Was that an
never, I
AV
know, I
event?
know. Welcome to AV, Dave. Welcome to AV. Stand in the hospitality area. But we had this thing going where they rotated in groups, so they got broken up into 5 groups, and they would rotate from room A to B to C to D to E, and room E was the pub. And so very quickly I realized, okay, just hang out in room E, because ultimately everybody will go through that room. And plus, that's the informal place where I can talk to people. And I spent the night listening to people talk about what InfoComm was doing right, what InfoComm was doing wrong. But I really didn't change much of anything for about a year. And then the brand change, I'm sorry, that was your original question. You'll learn quickly, Justin. You have to sort of control my answers. But the brand change, honestly, that started with asking our marketing group to take a look at our PowerPoint template and freshen it. Um, I, I remember I was coming out of a large global architectural firm. So if
Right.
you've interfaced with those types of firms, they're very visual. They're very vibrant in the way that they tell a story and present, because that's the way architects are. And InfoComm wasn't. I mean, was was not high value graphic presentation. There wasn't a lot. I mean, the name for an association sort of evoked, sort of a telecom company of 1980s. And
Couldn't agree with you more.
I wanted a fresher look, because I think our industry is at the edge. I think it's exciting. I think it's about creating emotion and about connecting people. And I just didn't feel like InfoComm did that. But I had no intentions of actually changing the name of the association. And in fact, it took about a year of arguing with me to convince me that there was no alternative to be authentic. We could make the InfoComm logo look flashier. And by the way, I mean, we clearly are highly invested in that brand and that logo, but it's about the show. The association. If I went around the world and I said, as I said, I listened, right? So tell me how InfoComm is doing for you. If I was lucky, I got Do you mean InfoComm, the association, or InfoComm, the show?
Oh, right. Very
But
good. Okay.
most of the time, what I got was, oh, I love InfoComm. I was in Vegas in 2013 and I had a great time and I saw this. Um, and they didn't even realize that there was this entire association that was
Or
providing
even membership.
services.
Yeah, like,
Right.
and even I've experienced that a lot too. Like, I say I'm a member of AVIXA or InfoComm for the past 7 years now, but at the very beginning, it was that type of feeling of what's InfoComm? Is this just an American slang of a word of, a membership to, technology? Like, it didn't really spell out AV the way the name Avixa now does. Um, did Were you impressed at the time when all the everything changed? Like, it felt like a sudden click, light bulb went on, no pun intended, and all of a sudden every building, every website, branding, everything just got changed overnight. It just felt so quick, so fast.
Good.
Yeah, which is
Good.
great. Yeah, it's what's supposed to happen. But do you think everyone bought into it quickly and loved the change?
No, 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 no. Nobody agrees with not a single decision have I ever been a part of in this role has everybody agreed with.
Okay.
Eh, I live the classic. You can make some of the people happy some of the time, none of the people all the time. Um, eh, eh, but I think the debate is done. I mean, the story isn't that we changed our brand anymore. The story has moved on to what is AV, what is the import of AV, um, what is our future, how do we best serve the industry, what is the industry, why do we exist? And those are great questions and incredibly important questions to engage our community with. The the actual announcement of the brand, it was it was probably about a year. So a year of making the decision, and it's not like I can't make a decision. It's that I didn't want to do it. I felt like um, it would be distracting from serving our community. But really, what I learned in the conversation was that we can't really serve our community as well without putting a flag in the ground and saying we are AV and not information communications, and we are about experience, and we are an association, and we should celebrate all of that and not do it halfway. Don't That's a big part of me. Like, if you're going to do it. If you're not going to
Well,
do
you're
it, don't
gonna
do it.
you're gonna bring me on to my one of my devil questions that I'm gonna ask you,
Uh,
and that is AVIT? And I'm going to put this on the record. David says AV is not, or AV is IT. What is it, David?
I think it's a waste of air to have that conversation, honestly. Uh, uh, and I'm not trying to duck it. Um, I think AV is I think AV is about experience. I think it's about connecting people. I don't think you can do that without IT in
I
today's
totally
world.
agree. I totally agree. I
And
think I wrote an article about it. AV is not IT. We're two different partners, and we're happily married for a long time. So that's the way I always put it. I've had
you
this
can't
debate
you
for
can't do.
several times.
It's about space technology and content and the marriage of those three.
Mhm.
And no single one stands on its own and delivers an experience. If you're in a 200-degree room with beautiful audio and visual, you're not going to have a good experience because you're going to be melting.
Yeah.
If you are in a fabulously comfortable seat in the most beautiful lounge, but you can't actually hear the performer, you're not having the experience you should have. And if you are in both a comfortable room and you can hear the performer beautifully and it's me singing, you are not having a good experience. I mean, it's about all three.
Yeah.
And I think I, th- I think I think people there's a challenge in today's world, right? I can't fix this, but I can try to influence the part that I touch that has has moved towards oversimplification and the loss of nuance and the loss of uh, communication for understanding. And people tend to pick a position and then they solidify in that position rather than hearing other people's positions and learning from it. I, I think the debate about what's more important, being technically correct or artistically brilliant, I think that's actually a debate I think we shouldn't be having. I think you have to have both if you want to create value for a customer.
Absolutely, I totally agree. It and so easily, and I think that's the important. And it brings me on to my next question about CTS and the qualifications that you can get through AVIXA. It, I think the CTS, I have the CTS on one of maybe. Now the numbers is growing. When I got my CTS, it was one of 7 in Ireland, and I think it went now up to around the 20 mark. But what it's taught me is, as well as the project management ends of things, is the fact that you have to aim for the end user. It's not providing the latest gizmos and tech to solve a solution. It's what the end user requires, and it always comes back to that. Still, we talk about AVIXA, we talk about InfoComm. It seems that there's times where AVIXA is seen as too American. It's seen as the CTS. Oh well, um, I've been in the AV industry for X amount of years. Why do I need to get a qualification to do things? And then you have the great Chuck Espinoza, who's like a military guy who just tells you have to do it. This is it, and are the standards. How do we keep that name and the push for people to get the qualifications with AVIXA? And being the head honcho of AVIXA, has Chuck ever put the finger down and said,
That's scary to me. No way. Nah, we Well, first of all, I have a CTS.
"Oh, you have the okay, fair enough. Sorry, fix that. Yes, you have your CTS. Okay,
In fact, I have a CTS since 2004. I had CTS before I had this position.
okay,
I'm a big personal believer and professional believer in certification. Um, I think so. Ultimately, what is a certification? What are those letters? They are an abbreviation for a resume page, right? Um, if if you were an architect, you'd have a portfolio that showed your work, but you'd also have your degree and you'd have your license to practice. Um, the the value of a CTS is in demonstrating knowledge and capabilities in order to obtain that certification, and then demonstrating a commitment to your professional development by maintaining that certification. I have a certification that you've never heard of called CAE. I'm guessing you've never heard of that, but
it rings a bell, but I don't know where to start.
this stands for Certified Association Executive.
Okay,
Um,
yeah,
but there's a lot of people I talk to every day that have that certification. And so, but not everybody knows what that certification means. The people that it matters to know what it means. So the key here isn't to make everybody care about the CTS. The key is to identify the audience that does or should care about it and help them understand the value and importance of it. And the way you do that, it's back through communications and engagement. So you bring people to the conversation. You don't push them away from the conversation. And AVIXA's done a lot of work in that regard, but it will never be done. From 20 CTS holders in Ireland, I could tell, my board that we've increased the CTS holders by 300%, which is great, right?
yeah, true.
Not so great though if you look at raw numbers. Um, it is a push and pull. Part of what happens is that you tell everybody you come into contact with why the CTS matters, what it means, what it says, what you went through to get it. Some people you speak to are going to be inspired to pursue it because of your statements. You're going to potentially use it in a pitch to a customer, or to say, here's why you should, or an employer, here's why you should hire me.
Mm.
I don't know the numbers straight out, but we have demonstrable evidence that shows an increase in your compensation that's related to a CTS high, and a CTSD. So it has real tangible value, but I actually think there's a there's an intangible value which says AV is a profession. I'm a profession, or I'm a professional, and I I am willing to take, again, it's that I'm willing to take an authentic full step in that regard.
Mm.
Um, we aren't the marketing body for the AV industry. Um, the you Our members have to do their own marketing. They have to do their own differentiation. I think if they don't follow through with investing in their employees and helping them obtain this certification, they're missing a hugely valuable opportunity.
Well, I think in the past 2 to 3 years, David, there has been a bigger push in Ireland for AV companies recognizing AVIXA and recognizing the CTS, and you can see it. Talk to me about like your time in AVIXA and moment of joy and greatness. That times where you just went, that was just. If you were to pick out your most magical moment so far with AVIXA, what's it been?
Mm. I love this job. Um, there have there was a one of our first shows in Mumbai. We worked with a workforce, like a student organization, and arranged for a student tour of the shop. And we had anticipated and planned for, I think, about 40 or 50 students to come. And so we had staff that were going to do a presentation and then break them up into groups of 10 and tour them through, right?
Mm.
We had 300 students come in, some, but don't quote me on the number, but some insanely high number of students come in. And so we're scrambling like, oh my God, what are we going to do? We got to figure out how we're going to break this up without taking over the whole floor. There's a balance that exhibitors have where they want to support the future of the industry, but they also want to have their staff talking to people that are going to spend money, not necessarily students that are asking them questions. And so working that whole thing through, but part of what it was I had an opportunity to present to this group and talk about the industry and talk about the potential of jobs in the industry. And then following that, the serious and the fun part of it, the fun part of it was um, I felt like I was running for president of the United States, because with the end of it, every one of those kids wanted a selfie with me in it. And I texted my son and I'm like, your father is so cool. He just had like 200 kids that wanted him in his selfies with them. And he instantly replied back like, give him a give him a day, Dad. They'll realize you're incredibly boring and have no interest in you. But so that's the fun part. The serious part was engaging with these students about like, how did you get here, and looking at their excitement and seeing the opportunities that were in front of them, and maybe having uh, some small seed of contributing to a future that they hadn't anticipated. And I get to do that a lot, Justin.
Mm.
I mean, this this there's as I said, very little I do. In fact, nothing I do is supported by everybody. But we get a chance to change the world as an industry, and I have the privilege and the opportunity to be a part of that. I mean, the work we've done in the last year and a half, I mean, longer than that, but more directly and explicitly in the last year with regards to diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging. Um, yeah, again, you can't, you yourself, Justin, would have trouble changing the entire world, right, and fixing everything. But we can try to influence for the better the part that we touch. And I have an opportunity to touch a lot of the world through this position.
And just hearing you for the past 30 minutes, David, like you come across as such an optimistic, positive character. I know it's that smile. That smile is just brilliant. But with we have to talk. We can't go through this whole interview without talking about COVID-19 and the global
Mm.
pandemic and how it absolutely has crushed every industry, not just the AV industry. But I think one of the positives that we can take from the whole event, the pandemic, is that AVIXA, it's immediately from the get-go, turned around and said, okay, guys, you're all working from home. Some of you may have been put on COVID allowance and made redundant, but we're offering free training. That was such an amazing step, I think, by AVIXA. Where do you see things? Okay, we just after having an InfoComm online, ISE. Uh, Finally, we were able to get into Barcelona, albeit small. The same with London. But where do you see the AV industry now because of the pandemic, and what positives can we take from it? Where do you see it going forward?
Yeah, it has been a tragic experience for so many of our members, on a personal level, on a corporate level. Um, yes, I'm an optimistic person, and the I think from adversity you grow, right? I mean, that which the we tend to not learn as well when everything is going well. It's the it's the storms that um, force you to evaluate your choices and to learn new skills. Um, as an industry, we took a huge hit globally, and segments of our industry were decimated. We work to support the live events, the people that are supporting AV technology and everything from performance venues to houses of worship, and those organizations, many of them were downsized by 90%, and many of them are gone. And many of them have moved on to other positions because they couldn't go without work for 18 months. So we're going to face a talent shortage as we try to rebuild, as much of the industry, much of the world is facing. We're coming out of it in different phases. The same or the week in between Barcelona and London, we announced the movement of our Mumbai show to a virtual show. Um, and in 2 weeks, I'm looking at the date on my computer screen, sorry. In 2 weeks, we're opening up our show in Beijing that we anticipate having 30,000 plus people at. So there you have, in the course of from June 15th to July 21st, literally the announcement of a cancellation of a show and the delivery of a show. What does this all, I mean, from a AVIXA perspective, we took over the course of 3 weeks, we lost 90% of our operating revenue, which is trade shows. The membership dues, certification fees, testing fees, the training revenues, that that's the other 10% of our revenues. I think when we look back on these years or this year, we will look at we were already positioned as an organization to recognize that what we do at the core is bring a community together. We do that in a physical space called a trade show or a conference or a classroom. What we hadn't had in place very effectively was a virtual place. And I still don't think anybody has that perfectly yet.
No,
Um,
I totally agree. You know,
but I think we need it.
yeah,
But I don't think it replaces the physical events. I think it enhances them. I think it reinforces them. I think it. I think it's the example I've been using with people is you take a great book. Let's use The Martian. I love that book. And I loved the movie. She didn't make the movie by putting a camera on top of the book and turning each page, right? That's not
yeah,
how you make a movie from a book. Same story, same plot line, same characters, but two very different media delivery systems, which have different roles and different levels of engagement and limitations and opportunities. I think that's how we have to look at the physical events and the virtual engagement. I don't think a year from now we're going to say, okay, we're not going to have any books anymore because we now have invented movies.
mhm,
And I don't think we're going to have no movies anymore because everybody knows how to read a book. I think there's a place for both the physical event and the virtual event. And I think they can both be enjoyed. And some people don't read, some people don't go to movies,
yeah.
but some people do both.
And I can't
And
wait to be able to get back to a physical trade show. You know, you miss, like I've talked about it on previous podcast episodes, where even when you go to something virtually, you're talking to the exhibitors and they're holding up stuff to screen, and you just want to hold it, physically press those buttons and see what each one of those buttons does. You know,
yeah, I
that's
was in Barcelona. I was lucky enough to be able to get there, and I felt like it was important to go to demonstrate AVIXA's commitment to ISE, to demonstrate our commitment to the industry, and also to demonstrate our commitment to our hosts, the Catalonian government and Barcelona government and the FIRA. Um, I was at a reception that was out on a terrace, in the evening after the first day of the show, and was standing with a glass of wine and chatting with people, which is something that, I do a lot
but it
in
also
my
probably felt
job.
so surreal
It
at
was
the time.
so emotionally uplifting, Justin,
Mm,
and 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 beyond the emotional uplifting, there were 50 people at that reception that I knew that I would not set up a Zoom call with, that I wouldn't set up a Teams call with, that we had not seen each other and talked to each other in a year and a half, and they're not in my core group of people I work with,
mhm.
so I don't see them. But those are people that have insight to help me do my job better. I have insight to help them do their job better. There is value from that connection that is lost in this environment. I'd like to try to find a way to create that virtually,
Mhm.
um, but it hasn't been created yet.
Well, I think looking at AVIXA personally, I think the one opportunity that came from it is the training and the fact that the new LMS is on board. The whole site just got a rehaul over the past 18 months to offer more micro credentials and micro courses, and then the video ends of things. Chuck has, I know, has been incredibly busy from his farm doing events, or doing videos. But if you were to wave a magic wand after this pandemic, where would you like to see the industry go? Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, not just AVIXA.
The industry or AVIXA.
The industry,
I think the industry should double down on what's at the core of our value, which is connecting people to people.
Mm-hmm.
So we started as an association supporting a bunch of men that wanted to sell film projectors to schools. And yes, it was a bunch of men, and they were looking to sell film projectors to schools. A little thing called World War II broke out, and they ended up selling a lot of film projectors to a lot of different armies. But we aren't about technology. We're not alone. We're the technology for technology's sake, right? I've been around long enough to go through CRTs and slide projectors, and in my career time frame, I'm not necessarily a spring chicken, but I'm also not 500 years old. The pace of that change will continue, but what isn't changing is the value, and what's been underscored by this pandemic is the value of connecting people to people. And the richer that connection, English is a funny language, right? Richer that connection actually can be used in both meanings of that word. The greater you make that connection, the more valuable it is, and the more you as a service provider to create that connection will be able to extract that value, aka get rich from. When we go back to, and as we've gone back to, depending on where you are in the world, restaurants and hotels and houses of worship and rooms of learning, the key differentiator between those physical spaces and what we've lived through virtually is the technology that our industry brings to play, to underscore, to be the highlighter, to reinforce the communications that are taking place and connections that are being built there. It's like our industry was made for this. This is what we are about.
All of a sudden, we're the most important people in the room, especially, and that's what I think the opportunities of this pandemic has brought, especially when I work in higher ed. I remember going to different trade shows between ISE and further afield, and people, for me personally, it's felt that oh, you work in the higher ed, okay, you're not working private, you don't have the money to spend, versus all of a sudden now, I think the next InfoComms, next ISEs, the higher ed trade room will be much, much bigger, because they know that whether you're working in primary school or K to 12, secondary schools or higher ed, they all have these type of environments. They have the Zoom, they have the Microsoft Teams that they need to have in case another outbreak of COVID-19 or whatever one we want to call the next pandemic happens. Please God, it doesn't. But I think now, all of a sudden, people want to listen to the AV guy that works in higher ed. I think that's what's going to, for me, I think that's what's going to be the big difference of trade shows in the future, and more as a service approach and software as a service. I know that sort of falls under the IT bracket. We go back there. I'm going to throw some quick fire questions at you here now, David. Well, first of all, I want to ask: is your son going to follow you into the AV industry? No. Definitely. That's straight out. No. Okay. Yeah.
Well, but he's technology. He's just finished up his master's in mechanical engineering out of Berkeley, and he's looking at control systems, so sort of autonomous vehicle, drone control, that type of activity.
Drones is still AV once you put a camera on it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Okay, quick fire question. What's your favorite trade shows to go to? ISE or InfoComm?
Which one of my sons is my favorite son? I'm not answering that, Justin.
You can't answer that, especially in your position. Okay, Vegas or Florida then?
I prefer the show in Florida. I prefer Vegas as a experience city.
Yeah, I know. I definitely need to get over to an InfoComm. Really do have to get over
You
to an
know,
InfoComm.
that we do a survey every year, and it's actually one of the it's we get comments from all the attendees and exhibitors. It's about a 150-page report when you compile it all, and typically I have a long flight following that at some point, and I will read that survey. And absolutely every year we get about 50% of the people that say never come back to Florida, and 50% of the year of the responses are never come back to Vegas. I mean,
It's
the value is we reach two different audiences. About 60% of the people that attend the show only go to one or the other city, and our
and
exhibitors want that.
David, you could put on the best show and people will complain about the heat.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's see what the weather's like in October this year.
Yeah, well, I'm still hoping that as soon as Brexit happened, I always prayed that AVIXA was going to set up an Irish headquarters to just, but then I guess the nearest I could get to is to move to Munich or something like that to become a member of AVIXA. I was always hoping that maybe you set up a little hub in Dublin, virtual hub in Dublin.
It's a great city. Maybe we can do that.
Yeah, in the future. If you had advice for anyone that's entering into the AV industry? And this is my final question. If you had advice, I know we've come to a pandemic. What advice would you give someone that's thinking AV is their area of trade?
Pay attention to the art and the science. The magic of our industry is the marriage of the two, and not either or on its own. um, and 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 then recognize in fact that that is magic and it is valuable. I think, I don't know why. I think maybe because half of the people in our industry are failed rock musicians or failed musicians, but there's this sense of humility within our industry that at one hand is what I love about our industry, because it's really hard to build a career in our industry. There isn't an ascribed path where you have trade position one that turns into trade position two. You have to find your way through this industry and find a path and develop skills in an unstructured way. And so I think in some ways we weed out people that don't have heart that are in this industry. But then we just have this sense of almost apology that we're not musicians and we're not IT, and don't recognize that by virtue of being part of both of those, we are uniquely qualified to deliver value in virtually every marketplace. Um, don't don't limit yourself with labels that devalue what you contribute. That's what I would
Oh
say to
yeah,
somebody coming in.
I couldn't agree more. I always say to people, AV is so wide of a spectrum of what we cover, what we do on a day by day basis, and the beauty of the story is no day is the same.
But it requires discipline, man. I mean, it's just like those who do make a career out of music or do make a career out of art. They aren't just hanging out for an hour in a day trying to play the piano. They are studying and committing to their craft and practicing and delivering and every day learning and improving. And that must happen. We can't afford to be lazy technicians or lazy artists to be as valuable as the potential exists for us to be.
David, I've taken up loads of your time, but I've had so much joy and pleasure of finally getting to have an interview with you, and I hope one of these days now, I hope it could be ISE be the next time we meet, but I do have on the agenda, and I have said to my wife that I want to get to Vegas. of these days for InfoComm. But hopefully at some stage we can physically shake hands and have a drink together at one of these trade shows. It's been great talking to you. Thank you so much. If people want to reach out to you, do you accept people on LinkedIn or Twitter? Or...
Absolutely. I'm at David Labuskes on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn on David Labuskes. You can email me at dlabuskes@avixa.org, and you can call me at the office. I actually pretty much return everybody's call. I mean, it's what I ultimately I work for you.
and that's the key message there, and so where we live. David, thank you so much for taking the time out for
it is fun. Thank you.
My thanks to David Labuskes for joining us on episode 49 of the All Things Techie podcast. We're going to hit episode 50 of our podcast. I can't believe 50 episodes I've done. And episode 50 is going to be a look back on all the episodes. It's a 2-hour-long special, but it's going to be great. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share. I'll talk to you very soon. Goodbye.